Most farmers believe that grass is the cheapest and most natural way to feed livestock. It's what we've been taught. It's what we see everywhere. Wide open fields, animals grazing freely, feeding themselves. It feels simple. It feels right. But what if that belief is quietly costing you money, land, and opportunity? What if the very thing you think is saving you money is actually limiting how much you can make? Because right now there are farmers, some working with less land than you, producing up to 5 times more livestock feed per acre. Not by working harder, not by spending more, but by growing something different. And the craziest part? Most people ignore these crops completely. In this video, we're breaking down 7 powerful crops that are changing the way smart farmers approach livestock feeding. These are the crops behind some of the most efficient small farms today, the kind of farms generating steady income without needing massive land. And as we go through them, you'll start to see something clearly, the difference between just farming and actually running a profitable farming system. Because if you're trying to build real small farm income, if you're thinking about homesteading for profit, or even starting a farming side hustle, then what you feed your animals matters more than you think. Now here's the problem most people don't realize. Grass, on its own, is not designed for maximum productivity. It grows slowly. Its nutritional value can fluctuate, and most importantly, it takes up space. A lot of space. So if you're relying only on grass, you're often forced into one of 2 situations. Either you use a large piece of land to support a small number of animals, or you try to increase your livestock and end up spending more money on commercial feed. And that's where most beginners get stuck. They start small, hoping to grow into a profitable small farm, but the numbers don't add up. Feed costs rise, land becomes limiting, and suddenly, what was supposed to be a source of homestead income starts to feel like a burden. But here's what experienced farmers understand. The real game is not just raising animals. The real game is producing feed efficiently. Because once you control your feed, you control your costs. And once you control your costs, you control your profit. That's where these high-yield crops come in. They grow faster. They produce more biomass. And they deliver more nutrition per acre than traditional grazing systems. Meaning you can raise more animals on less land with less spending. That's the foundation of profitable livestock systems. And once you understand this shift, everything changes. Now let's start with the first crop, one that has quietly become a favorite among small-scale farmers around the world. Because this crop doesn't just grow fast, it grows aggressively. And if you use it right, it can completely transform how you feed your animals. Napier grass, also known as elephant grass. At first glance, it looks like just another tall grass. But don't let that fool you. This is not your typical pasture grass. Napier grass is specifically grown for high-yield feeding. It grows thick, dense, and incredibly fast. And once established, it can be harvested multiple times throughout the year. Imagine planting once and harvesting again and again without needing to replant every season. That alone already puts it ahead of regular grass. But the real advantage comes from its yield. Per acre, Napier grass can produce significantly more biomass than traditional grazing fields, which means more feed from the same land. For anyone running backyard farming systems or trying to maximize a small farm, this is a game changer. Instead of letting animals roam and graze inefficiently, you cut the Napier grass and bring it to them. Controlled feeding, less waste, more efficiency. And here's something even more important. Napier grass works incredibly well with small farm animals. Goats thrive on it, especially breeds like Nigerian dwarf goats, which are popular in homestead systems due to their size and productivity. Rabbits can also benefit when it's properly managed. And when you combine it with other feed sources, you start creating a system that feels less like traditional farming and more like a structured, profitable operation. This is how many farmers transition from basic livestock keeping into a real homestead business. But like everything powerful, there's a detail most people overlook. Napier grass needs proper cutting intervals. If you let it grow too old, the stems become tough and less nutritious. So timing matters. And this is something you'll notice as we go through these crops. It's not just about what you grow. It's about how you use it. because the difference between a struggling farm and a profitable one often comes down to small decisions like this. Now, while Napier grass is incredible for bulk feed, the next crop we're about to talk about focuses on something else entirely: protein. And if you understand livestock nutrition, you already know protein is where real growth happens. Faster weight gain, better health, higher productivity, which means more value from the same animals. And this next crop delivers exactly that. Alfalfa. This is one of the most respected forage crops in the world. And for good reason. Alfalfa is packed with protein, vitamins, and minerals that animals need to grow efficiently. In fact, many profitable livestock operations rely on alfalfa as a core part of their feeding system, because when animals eat better, they grow better. And when they grow better, your farm becomes more profitable. That's the connection most beginners miss. They focus on the number of animals, instead of focusing on the quality of feed. But experienced farmers know feed quality drives everything. Alfalfa doesn't just provide nutrition. It reduces the need for expensive supplements, which directly impacts your farm ROI. Less money spent on feed inputs, more efficient animal growth, higher returns. And that's exactly what you want if you're building a farm startup or exploring farming for beginners. Now imagine combining what we've already talked about: a high-yield crop like Napier grass for bulk feeding, and a high-protein crop like alfalfa for nutrition. Suddenly, your system becomes balanced, efficient, strategic, and this is where farming starts to feel less random and more like a business, because that's what this really is: a system designed to turn land into feed, feed into livestock, and livestock into profit. And we're just getting started, because the next crop we're about to talk about might be one of the most underrated plants in all of small-scale farming. It grows fast, it's incredibly versatile, and once you understand how to use it, you might start seeing your farm in a completely different way. The next crop doesn't just feed your animals, it upgrades them. And once you understand what it can do, you'll start to question why more farmers aren't using it. Moringa. At first, it doesn't look like anything special. A simple tree, light leaves, fast growth. But beneath that simplicity is something powerful. Because moringa is not just a plant, it's a nutrient powerhouse. Rich in protein, loaded with vitamins, packed with minerals. And when used correctly, it can significantly improve the health and performance of your livestock. Now think about this for a second. Most farmers spend money trying to improve their animals, buying supplements, additives, commercial feeds, all to get better growth, better reproduction, better results. But what if a large part of that solution could be grown right on your land? That's what makes moringa so valuable in homesteading for profit. It grows quickly. It can be harvested multiple times, and it thrives in conditions where many other crops struggle, which makes it perfect for small-scale farming, especially in regions where consistency is a challenge. Now here's where it gets interesting. Moringa works extremely well with small farm animals. Rabbits respond well to it. Goats, especially Nigerian dwarf goats, benefit from its rich nutritional profile. And even poultry farmers are beginning to incorporate it into feeding systems. Because when animals consume higher quality nutrients, their growth becomes more efficient, their health improves, and your overall livestock profit increases. This is how smart farmers begin to build systems that don't just survive, but generate consistent homestead income. But there's something you need to understand. Moringa is powerful, but it's not meant to be used alone. And this is a mistake many beginners make. They find one miracle crop and try to build their entire system around it. But profitable farming doesn't work that way. It's not about one crop. It's about combining the right crops in the right way. And that's where things start to get interesting. Because once you begin stacking these crops together, Napier grass for bulk, alfalfa for protein, moringa for nutrients, you start creating a feeding system that feels completely different from traditional farming. More controlled, more predictable, more profitable. And this is the point where many farmers start to realize they don't need more land. They just need better strategy. But even with all this, There's still one major problem that stops most farms from becoming truly efficient. And this is where things start to separate average farms from high-performing ones. Because up until now, we've been talking about crops that grow on land. But what if I told you there's a feed source that grows on water, multiplies rapidly, and can produce more feed in days than some crops produce in weeks? And yet, most farmers ignore it. Before we get into that, you need to hear this, because this is where most people go wrong. Even if you plant all these crops, even if you understand the basics, most farms still struggle to become profitable. Not because the crops don't work, but because the system is incomplete. They grow feed, but they don't think about efficiency. They harvest, but they don't plan consistency. They feed animals, but they don't optimize output. And without that, everything becomes harder than it needs to be. This is why many people try farming and walk away thinking it doesn't work, when in reality, they were just missing structure. Because once you build the right system, everything changes. Feed becomes predictable, growth becomes consistent, and profit becomes possible. Now, let's talk about one of the most efficient feed sources you can introduce into your system: duckweed. This is where things take a completely different turn, because duckweed doesn't grow in soil. It grows on water, and it grows fast. In the right conditions, duckweed can double its mass in just a few days. Let that sink in. A crop that multiplies in days, which means you're not waiting weeks or months to harvest. You're harvesting constantly, and that's exactly what makes it powerful in micro farming systems, especially for people working with limited space. Now imagine this: a small pond, or even a controlled water container, producing fresh feed continuously. That's a completely different level of efficiency. And when you integrate that into your farm, you're no longer depending only on land-based crops. You're diversifying your feed sources, which reduces risk and increases output. Duckweed is especially useful for poultry systems, including quail farming. It can also support fish and other livestock when used correctly. And because it grows so fast, it becomes one of the most cost-effective feed sources you can produce, which is exactly what you want if you're building a farming side hustle or trying to increase small farm income without expanding your land. But again, there's a detail that matters. Duckweed needs proper water management. If the water quality drops, production drops. And this is something that separates serious farmers from those who struggle. Attention to detail, because small improvements create big results over time. Now, by this point, you might be starting to see the pattern. Each crop we've talked about so far solves a different problem. Napier grass gives you volume. Alfalfa gives you protein. Moringa gives you nutrients. Duckweed gives you speed and efficiency. And when you combine them, you're no longer running a basic farm. You're building a system designed for output, a system designed for consistency, a system designed for profit. But we're not done yet, because there's another critical piece missing: storage. Because what happens when your crops are growing faster than your animals can consume? What happens during dry seasons? What happens when conditions change? This is where the next crop becomes essential, because it doesn't just feed your animals. It allows you to store feed, plan ahead, and protect your farm from uncertainty. And once you understand how this works, you'll start thinking less about surviving and more about scaling. Now, this is where things start to separate those who are just feeding animals from those who are running a real farm business. Because up until now, we've talked about crops that grow fast, produce more, and improve nutrition. But none of that matters if you can't control consistency. Because farming is not just about what happens when everything is going well. It's about what happens when things don't. Dry seasons, feed shortages, unpredictable growth cycles. This is where most farms break. Not because they don't have knowledge, but because they don't have preparation. And this is exactly where the next crop becomes one of the most important in your entire system. Maize. But not just maize grown casually. Maize grown for silage. Now, if you've never heard of silage before, here's what you need to understand. Silage is a method of preserving fresh crops so they can be stored and used later without losing most of the nutritional value, which means instead of depending only on what is growing right now, you create a reserve, a backup, a system that protects your farm from uncertainty. And this is one of the biggest differences between struggling farms and profitable farming operations. Planning. Because once you start producing and storing your own feed, you stop reacting to problems and start controlling outcomes. Maize is perfect for this because it produces a high amount of energy-rich biomass. When harvested and stored properly, it becomes a reliable feed source that can carry your animals through periods when fresh crops are limited. And this is how farmers stabilize their homestead income, not by hoping conditions stay perfect, but by preparing for when they don't. Now think about what we've built so far. Fast-growing crops, high-protein crops, nutrient-rich crops, and now, stored feed. You're no longer dependent on a single system. You're building layers, and each layer adds strength to your farm. But we're not done yet, because there's another crop that brings something different to the table, something that becomes incredibly valuable, especially in challenging conditions. Sorghum. Now, sorghum might not get as much attention as some of the other crops we've talked about, but that's exactly why it's so powerful. Because while other crops struggle in dry conditions, sorghum keeps growing. It's drought-resistant, it's resilient, and it produces a high yield per acre, which makes it perfect for farmers who want stability, not just productivity. Because what's the point of having a high-yield crop if it fails when conditions change? This is why experienced farmers don't rely on just one type of crop. They build systems that can survive different situations. And sorghum becomes one of those reliable pillars. It gives you confidence. Because even when conditions are not ideal, your farm continues to produce. And that consistency is what drives long-term livestock profit. Now, for the final crop. This one is different. Because it doesn't just feed your animals, it improves your soil. Cowpea forage. This is what we call a dual-purpose crop. It provides feed, and at the same time, it improves the fertility of your land by fixing nitrogen into the soil, which means while you're feeding your livestock, you're also preparing your land for better future yields. And this is where farming becomes something bigger than just daily tasks. It becomes a system that improves over time, because the more you use it correctly, the better it performs. Cowpea forage fits perfectly into small-scale farming systems, especially for those looking to build a sustainable homestead business. Because now you're not just thinking about immediate results. You're thinking about long-term growth. And that's the mindset shift that separates beginners from those who actually build profitable small farms. Now let's take a step back, because at this point, you've seen all 7 crops, each one powerful on its own. But the real power comes from how they work together. Because this is not about replacing grass completely. It's about upgrading your system. Think about the difference. Traditional grazing. Animals roaming across large land, feeding slowly, wasting energy, limited control. Now compare that to a structured feeding system. High-yield crops, cut and carry feeding, balanced nutrition, stored reserves, faster growth, less land, more control. This is the difference between basic farming and profitable farming. Because when you start producing more feed per acre, everything changes. You can raise more animals. You reduce feed costs. You increase efficiency. And most importantly, you increase your farm ROI. This is how small farms turn into income-generating systems. This is how backyard farming evolves into a real business. This is how a simple farm startup becomes something scalable. And this is why so many farmers are shifting away from relying only on grass. Because grass alone can't compete with a system like this. Now here's the part most people skip. Application. Because information without action does nothing. So if you're serious about building a profitable small farm, start simple. Don't try to do everything at once. Pick 2 or 3 of these crops. Combine them. Test them. Observe how your animals respond. Then expand gradually. Because success in farming doesn't come from doing everything fast. It comes from doing the right things consistently. Now, before we close, There are a few mistakes you need to avoid, because these are the exact mistakes that stop people from seeing results. Planting without planning, growing crops without understanding how they fit into a system, harvesting at the wrong time, ignoring storage, and most importantly, trying to copy without understanding. Because what works is not just a crop, it's the system behind it. And once you understand that, everything becomes clearer. Now imagine this, a small piece of land, producing enough feed to support multiple livestock systems. Goats, rabbits, poultry, maybe even expanding into quail farming or other small farm animals, all supported by a structured, efficient feeding system. That's not just farming. That's a strategy. That's a business. And that's exactly what this channel is here to help you build. Because Herd and Harvest is not about random farming tips. It's about helping you create systems that actually make money. Systems that turn effort into income. Systems that turn land into opportunity. So, if you're serious about building a farm that works, if you want to learn how to increase your livestock profit, reduce your feed costs, and build a real homestead income, then you need to stay connected to this channel. Because the next video will show you something even more powerful. How some farmers have completely stopped buying feed and what they're using instead. And once you see that, you'll never look at farming the same way again. So don't miss it. Subscribe to Herd and Harvest now and click on the next video on your screen. Because the difference between struggling in farming and succeeding in it is knowing what to do next.